U.S. Senate Democrats are reportedly close to a deal on a scaled-back economic and climate package. What's in, what's out? Plus, Senate Republicans block national election reform again. What happens now? Hello, I'm Arlen Neidem, and this is The Heat. The cost is now said to be about $2 trillion for President Biden's economic and climate package. A big number, but far less than the $3.5 trillion first proposed. The challenge hasn't been between Democrats and Republicans, it's between progressive Democrats and two conservative members of their own party. But President Biden says he's optimistic the legislation will pass.
These bills are not about left versus right, or about moderate versus progressive, or anything that pits one American against another. These bills are about competitiveness versus complacency. They're about expanding opportunity, not having opportunity denied.
Let's get to our panel. Jadan Horyn is a writer and conservative commentator. Lincoln Mitchell is a political analyst and adjunct associate professor at Columbia University. Also with us is Chris Hahn. He hosts the Aggressive Progressive podcast and the syndicated Chris Hahn radio program. And Joseph Williams is a senior news editor with U.S. News and World Report. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Joseph Williams, Democrats have tabled this comprehensive spending bill, which includes money for, among other things, community college, childcare, the battle against climate change, tax benefits, and health care help. It started out, as I mentioned, as a $3.5 trillion bill, and now, because of opposition from these two Democrat senators, we understand it's been cut down to $2 trillion. No word yet on a vote. Where is this going?
It's going back to negotiating. And as you recall, even before, this was a $6 trillion bill when it came from Joe Biden's desk to the floors of the House and the Senate. So what they're doing is they're meeting again behind closed doors. There was another raft of meetings today, including meetings with the two senators, Manchin and Sinema, at the White House. More calls with progressives, more calls among progressives, more calls among the progressives talking to the conservatives. Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin are trying to get on the same page. And basically, there's more of an air of optimism now than there had been all week, especially since the price tag has come down. There's some progressive grumbling about that. But overall, the mood among them seems to be that they'll stage a strategic retreat and live to fight another day, knowing that if they cut back on some programs now, and for some chance they manage to hold on to both levers of power through the upcoming midterms, they'll be able to take another bite at the apple, and that they'll be able to expand their priorities then once they believe that they're out of the election cycle and there's not any more pressure on them to cede to Manchin and Sinema.
When you say strategic retreat, Joseph, do you mean this could come up for a vote again if they don't have the numbers this time around?
I think it will come up for a vote soon. Probably they will not take another vote until they have the numbers, but the information that I'm hearing is that they're getting close to having the votes that they'll need to move this thing forward. We have Joe Manchin, who is openly talking about how he is able to move past the number. He's not even talking about 1.5 trillion, which was his number going in. Now he's really mum about 1.9 trillion, which is a sign that he's getting on board. What they don't know, the X factor here, is Kyrsten Sinema. We haven't heard anything from her office. We haven't heard very much from her herself about where she is on this particular bill, but we do know that the size of the bill getting smaller is bringing Manchin along very slowly, if gradually, and Sinema is still kind of an enigma, but all signs indicate that since the corporate tax structure has been redone and may be eliminated, that was on her big ask list. And the prescription drug bill, or the prescription drug element of this bill, could be the major hang-up with her, and they're working on getting that resolved from what I understand.
Chris Hahn, as I said, these cuts to the bill are being considered to placate two conservative or moderate Democrats who are unhappy with the current spending proposals. But there is another risk here, isn't there? And that's on the left wing of the party, progressives in the party, who say they will block the bill if they don't get what they want, which are in these bills. So is the middle of the Democrat Party actually in a place where, well, it's actually a no-win situation?
No, I've been watching this very closely. Congresswoman Jayapal was speaking moments ago on another network, talking about how this is going to get done, how that she's been talking with Joe Manchin, she's been talking with the president. She had a lot of praise for the president. She said she spent hours with Joe Manchin, and she's also been speaking with Senator Kyrsten Sinema. So I think that this is going to get done. I think that the progressives are going to be they're not going to get everything they want, but they're going to get a lot of what they want. The moderates are not going to get everything they want, but they're going to get some of what they want. Everybody is going to walk away from the table a little unhappy, and that's how you know it's a good deal. The Democrats have to get something done before the midterms. Otherwise, what are they asking the voters to get them reelected to do? You got to show the voters that you're able to accomplish things. And I fully expect this bill to be voted on by the end of this month. I fully expect it to pass. I expect it to have a lot of things that the moderates want, including a change in the SALT caps that Donald Trump put into the tax bill that he passed in an effort to punish states like New York and California and New Jersey, but had the side effect of punishing states like Texas and Florida. So I expect a bill. I expect a good bill. It's not going to be everything I want. It's not going to be everything anybody wants, but it's going to get done.
What about things like climate change, Chris? You're going to see that in the bill?
I think you're going to see something for climate change. I think the reports of climate change's demise in this bill have been greatly exaggerated. I don't know that you're going to get everything you wanted on climate change, but there will be measures for climate change. We can no longer afford to ignore climate change. Climate change is not something that's in the future. Climate change has happened. We are in the middle of it. We need to mitigate it.
Jadan Horyn, why is there no Republican support for these two pieces of legislation? And what can Democrats do? What's the least Democrats can do to get at least some Republicans on board?
Well, I mean, Republicans did support the infrastructure bill. So, you know, there is Republican support, but there will not be Republican support for a bill that is crafted entirely by the Democratic Party. That's simply not how Washington works. But I think more to the point, you know, Republicans are content to watch and sit back and see the Democratic Party's self-immolation on this bill, because at the end of the day, the promise to the American people that President Biden made and that congressional leaders made in both houses run by the Democratic Party was that they would pass transformative change in order to reorient the economy around the working class. And now, through these compromises, which us Washington insiders, of course, know that's how the sausage is made, but the American people don't understand that the Democrats are essentially going to say in 2022, vote for us because we have unfinished business. I think that's a terrible proposition, you know, that we are looking at for the country. So, you know, Republicans are going to sit there and say, fine, you guys want to make your own base disillusioned with what you can accomplish with this historic opportunity, then go ahead and do that.
Lincoln Mitchell, does Jadan Horyn have a point there that these bills may get watered down to the extent where the electorate, voters, are not going to be convinced?
Well, I think he's got at least half a point there. One thing I would point out is that if the Democrats were to, let's just pass the $3.5 trillion bill, do it or more, a transformative piece of legislation, that doesn't guarantee victory. Ronald Reagan passed a transformative piece of legislation in 1981, and his party lost in midterms in 1982. Lyndon Johnson, going back in 1965, passed a lot of transformative legislation and took a hit in 1966. More recently, Donald Trump did through his tax cut. So this connection, which is very appealing, it's intuitive, it's what democracy should look like, it's not really there. My sense is the Democrats are going to lose control of the House regardless of whether or not they pass this bill, which is why, if you're a Democrat, you should want to pass this bill. Not because it's the secret to winning the midterms, but because it's what you want to do. I would also say something else. Joe Biden may be smarter than a lot of us realize here. What we are going to get if we land in that $1.9 to $2 trillion window, where I think we will land, is by far the biggest piece of progressive spending in decades. You'd have to go back to the Great Society. So is this transformative? It's too early to tell. That's a subjective term. But this is a massive piece of legislation, a massive amount by American standards. It comes down to about a cup of coffee a day for every American for 10 years. So let's have perspective. Not that we're going to spend it that way, but let's have some perspective here. But he started out at 6, which he was never going to get, and he landed at somewhere that is pretty good. The challenge for the Democrats is going to be to sell this as a victory and an accomplishment and move people past the narrative, which is now that, you know, they've had to cut and they didn't get what Biden wanted, and to a new narrative, which is we've passed, assuming we get They'd get the infrastructure bill as well, two pretty big pieces of legislation. That's a lot for the first year. It's not everything, but it's a lot.
Lincoln, there's also a feeling, and we've seen this in the media, that this is the last best chance for the Democrats to do something to address things like wealth inequality, income inequality. There's a feeling that the playing field's not been level for the past few decades, and this is a chance to level that playing field. It's only a small piece of legislation. It's not going to fix it all, but at least it's a start. Is this the last best chance for the Democrats?
Well, I would say it's the last best chance for a while, right? We know that, the most likely scenario is that the Republicans win back one chamber, probably the House, probably not the Senate, but effectively, from the legislative perspective, stop any Biden legislation from getting through. We know that we don't know what will happen in 2024, but even if Biden gets reelected, the fifth and sixth year of a term is a hard time to pass legislation. So this may be the best chance for at least another 6 years, going to 2028. So in Washington years, this is the last best chance. This 2-year window, and we are now about halfway through it, is the moment where the Democrats can pass the progressive legislation that has been bottled up for a very long time. And whatever they don't accomplish will have to wait. The stakes, as the colleague who was discussing climate change, are extremely high. And, America is moving in a way that it's getting tougher and tougher for the Democrats because of the population shifts away from small states into big states, which could continue to undercount in terms of Senate representation and things like that.
Yeah.
Joseph Williams, I want to move now to voting rights. Republicans have blocked an effort by Democrats to pass a voting rights bill. It was a procedural vote, which means that it can be voted on again. But this is a bill which requires a supermajority of 60 members of the United States Senate. But looking at what happened, and that happened this afternoon, is this, do you think, the end of efforts to entrench some kind of voting rights legislation at a federal level?
Well, it's hard to see how that gets resurrected. I know that one of the key elements of this proposal that they put forward was the fact that one of the moderate holdouts, Joe Manchin, we mentioned his name, we're probably going to mention it a lot more this evening, was behind recalibrating the legislation, the John Lewis Act, that was a lot more sweeping. In a lot of ways, this mirrors what is happening with the Democrats' large social spending bill. He retooled it, rejiggered it, put his name on it, and the party allowed him to do that because he was staunchly against adjusting the filibuster, or eliminating it completely, so that it could pass without a supermajority. So the theory, at least in some circles, was that if you allow him to put this bill on the floor with his name on it, with his fingerprints on it, and it fails, that may move him a little closer towards adjusting the filibuster. So far, that has not happened, or at least we haven't seen any elements of that. And short of that, yeah, it does look like this probably is the last shot that they'll get at any kind of sweeping voting rights reform that will either counterbalance or act as a counterweight to a lot of the local laws that are happening that some critics say is responsible for suppressing the vote.
Jadan Horyn, there are a number of Republican states, or I should say states with Republican majorities, which have passed laws, election laws, voting rights laws, and they say that these laws will restore confidence in the United States election system. But critics of these laws say, actually, no, it's an effort to make it harder to vote, and it targets minority voters. To which you would say what?
I think that's incredibly insulting. Everyone in the United States needs an ID, especially now, to verify our vaccination. So if we make that argument and we let it continue to hold water, because before, we could say that argument possibly could have merit. But now, when basic things in most states, in large cities, require all citizens to show a vaccination and an ID that verifies that that vaccination matches the person that's presenting it, I think it is incredibly reasonable, and the overwhelming majority of Americans, 80% in Monmouth poll, say that voter ID is essential for election integrity. And I think Democrats should stand on the right side of history on this and not make it about race, but instead make it about ensuring that we will never again have any candidate who can challenge the outcome of an election by saying that people who voted didn't have the right to vote or shouldn't have voted. So I think, for this issue itself, that is the number one thing, that Republicans really see. But the Senate, by its very nature, is designed to be a check on pure democracy. And the 60-vote threshold, while all of us can find consternation with it on either side, depending on who's in control, we do appreciate it when we're in the minority. So, I say to Democrats that, continuing to erode the filibuster for pieces of legislation isn't just a slippery slope, but in fact, it allows the Republican Party to pass legislation that may be or may have less than majority support in our country. And that's not good either when the shoe is on the other foot.
Joseph Williams, very quickly, your view on what Jadan just said, the explanation he has for why this legislation is being passed in Republican states.
Well, it's kind of an interesting explanation comparing voting to vaccine mandates. I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about a pandemic. On the other hand, you're talking about a right that's been entrenched in the Constitution since the beginning of the Republic. And there has been part of the problem with lack of confidence in voting and with the perceived lack of confidence is the fact that Republicans themselves has said that the vote is unfair, especially when they lose. There has been no evidence in any of these states that there has been a problem with voting. In fact, the Arizona audit, so-called audit, found more votes for Joe Biden than it did in the standard audit that happened in the state after the election. So it's kind of a specious argument to compare the two. And I also think that a lot of what Republicans believe is not about race tends to be about race. And it's not just a matter of opinion. There have been empirical studies, scientific studies, that have shown that these laws will have that harm.
Chris Hahn, to what extent is Donald Trump and his claims of election fraud responsible for Republican states passing this legislation?
100% responsible. 100% responsible. And as for voter ID, which was brought up a few minutes ago, the bill that was introduced on the floor of the Senate today that had Joe Manchin's stamp of approval on it had provisions for voter ID across this country, something every Republican senator has said they want to see. Well, they were given a bill that had it, and they voted no, because they don't want more people to vote, because if more people vote, they won't win. And as for the filibuster, I'll take a step further. Now, you all know, I worked for Majority Leader Chuck Schumer for many years. I worked in the U.S. Senate. If it was up to me, I would get rid of the Senate altogether. It is completely undemocratic. There is no reason why Wyoming should have the same representation in the Senate as California or New York or Texas or Florida. It's ridiculous. And it cannot sustain itself for the long term anymore because people are too partisan. Senators are too partisan. They are dug in. People don't negotiate anymore. And yes, it used to be the cooling saucer of the Republic, which was supposed to, take out the passions of the majority. And I believe in all that stuff. The problem is that's not how it works anymore. Now it is a partisan filibuster bank that needs to go. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. We didn't even have it for the first 100 years of this country. It's time for it to be abolished. And I believe that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are not going to let themselves be responsible for the end of our republic, for people not being able to vote. And that is the path we are going on in certain Republican states where the members of their state legislature want to choose the people who vote for them rather than have the people who vote for them choose their leaders. That is ridiculous. It is un-American. They are afraid of the voters, and they should be because they don't represent the majority of the Americans' point of views.
Lincoln Mitchell, I'm going to move shift to the investigation into the unrest on January 6th on Capitol Hill in Congress. A committee in Congress is investigating this, and it voted unanimously to hold one of President Trump's former top aides, Steve Bannon, in contempt for not complying with the subpoena to appear before that committee. This is what the vice chair of that committee, a Republican, Liz Cheney, who is also the daughter of the former Vice President Dick Cheney, this is what she had to say. Let's listen.
Based on the committee's investigation, it appears that Mr. Bannon had substantial advanced knowledge of the plans for January 6th and likely had an important role in formulating those plans. Mr. Bannon's and Mr. Trump's privilege arguments do, however, appear to reveal one thing. They suggest that President Trump was personally involved in the planning and execution of January 6th, and this committee will get to the bottom of that.
So, Lincoln, of course, this has got very political, but is there any merit to what we heard Liz Cheney say there?
Did you say this wasn't very political? Presumably, we have this investigation so we can find out whether there is any merit to what Liz Cheney was saying. There certainly is reason to believe that. So from that perspective, yes. One thing I would add here is that I'm interested in the work this committee does because as an academic and a scholar who writes about American democracy, I'm very interested to see what they find. We should all go into this as we watch this unfold, knowing that it's not going to change anything. It's not going to move American public opinion. It's not going to bring a lot of other Republicans to the idea that, wow, this really was a terrible thing, and it's very possible that the leaders of the Republican Party were involved at a very high level, and there was communication between the White House and far-right groups. We don't have the concrete proof of that, but we are going to that will be investigated. But even if all that is revealed, it's not going to change anything, and that's something that is really critically important here. This is the kind of thing we usually see in a post-authoritarian country, right? The authoritarian regime falls apart, ends, is overthrown, and the new regime comes in and tries to do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or something like that. But we can't do that here because we're not in a post-authoritarian position. We're a country where democracy remains under threat, and where the forces that were behind the January 6th insurrection are extremely powerful today. And the political support for the January 6th insurrection has actually increased since January 6th and January 7th. I came on this show. I came on your show around January 7th, 8th, or 9th and one of the other guests was a person who was close to the then President Donald Trump. And he said the Republican Party has learned its lesson. There's no way Donald Trump will be renominated in 2024. And I admit, in a somewhat unprofessional way, I chuckled, and I said if the Republican primary were held tomorrow, Donald Trump would win in a landslide. And of course, that's only become more true. So the political support has increased for the insurrectionists. So this investigation, I mean, I'm glad it's happening, but I don't expect much from it in terms of its political impact.
Jadan Horyn, what are your thoughts on what you've just heard? I mean, what are we to make of Steve Bannon's refusal to appear before this committee? I mean, is he trying to become some kind of martyr?
Well, I mean, I think his refusal is completely expected, and I think the committee expected it. You know, this is just a dance of publicity for both committee members and for those that are under investigation by the committee. I do have to say this though, that the Republican Party, while Donald Trump still commands roughly a third of support, if we look in the primary, that's still around what his floor and ceiling was within the party, except when he was president. The party coalesced around him, of course. But I don't think it is necessarily true that the former president, if he would run, that he would win, quote, in a landslide. I certainly believe that there are other viable candidates, and people are looking for a post-Trump Republican Party that is focused on the beliefs that the GOP has that are historic, and some of the populism that was brought in by the former president, but not necessarily by the messenger. So, there are other viable candidates, and I think, Republicans will filter through them to find, the best answer. But I don't know if Congresswoman Cheney is looking at it with an objective lens. I'm very interested in ultimately seeing what the report from this committee finds. But I also hope that they investigate everyone that was involved and had responsibility, from the Speaker with the Capitol Police to the Vice President to well, I served for the Majority Leader in the House, and I understand the role that the Speaker plays with the Capitol Police. Yeah. So I certainly think that there's intelligence briefings that the Speaker received.
Yeah. And look,
people may. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the committee should investigate all people responsible. That is a committee who takes its task seriously, and that the American people can believe that it wasn't a partisan witch hunt. If you want to give the former president the best gift possible, then have a biased committee. If you want to deliver to the American people the truth, then you investigate all people who had authority. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
It's as simple as that.
Okay, go ahead.
Republicans had an opportunity to join this committee, to have a nonpartisan, non-political, non-elected office committee. They didn't want it because the former president didn't want that to happen either. So, yeah, there needs to be an investigation, a full investigation. We need to know what Donald Trump knew and when he knew it, and when he kind of ordered this, frankly. This was him personified in these rioters. He loved it. He loved every single minute of it. And our republic is not safe until the American people realize what a threat he and his sycophants are to this republic.
Right, and that's why,
we
of course,
cannot
the
give him a
FBI
pass.
colossally failed
to
secure the Capitol in advance.
But I'm telling you right now,
intelligence apparatus
Jaden, just hold on, Jaden. Hold on.
to plan ahead. I mean, we can just sit there and blame the president. It's fine. It's a talking point. It's not the truth of what Congress does.
Okay, Jaden, very quickly.
Congress's responsibility is to investigate things. Even if it is partisan, their objective, like with the JFK shooting, is to investigate regardless of the politics involved, especially a committee of this gravitas on this issue. And I think it would behoove us to investigate our national intelligence apparatus for failing to get the intelligence through to the responsible parties.
Okay, I've just got a couple of minutes left, and I want to get to our last subject, which was the death of former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell. He died earlier this week. He left a controversial legacy because some regard him as a hero. Others say that, or point to the fact that he was a key member of an administration that lied to the world when they went to war against Iraq, which resulted in the deaths of up to 600,000 people, according to one study. Joseph Williams, what do you think his legacy will be?
His legacy overall will be positive, namely because of all the firsts that he achieved. But he himself had acknowledged that the argument for the Iraq War was a stain on his legacy. I think even owning up to that will probably give him a measure of grace.
Right.
But you can't take away from all of the accomplishments that he had and the fact that he was a stellar person who endorsed the first black president. He kind of moderated his politics towards the end of his life. And I think the worst part of his legacy is the fact that many people are using his death as an argument against the COVID vaccine.
Right. I want to get around the table very quickly. So, Lincoln Mitchell, what are your thoughts on Colin Powell's death? What did he leave behind?
Couple of things. Colin Powell had a very long career, and he ended up being, I think, a more partisan figure than he would have liked, and he struggled, as the previous speaker said. The other thing I would say about Colin Powell is it is an extraordinary American story in so many ways. Besides the obvious, I mean, Colin Powell grew up a few blocks from me, and as a New Yorker, you know, it's great to see a New Yorker make it big. It's great to see somebody from the Bronx who spoke Yiddish, make it to be Secretary of State, and it's a great immigrant story. And I know that Colin Powell would understand when I say Alav HaShalom.
Right. Jaden, what are your thoughts on the passing of Colin Powell? I mean, his views shifted considerably over the years after he left office. He even supported Barack Obama, and later he said that he even was not a member of the Republican Party any longer.
I mean, Colin Powell is an American hero. At the same time, he made, I think, grave mistakes with Iraq. You know, and as Torrey wrote in the Griot, you know, he paved the way for Barack Obama. Americans thought it was possible to have a black president.
All right, Jaden, I'm sorry. I want to go to Chris very quickly. Chris, in 15 seconds, how will he be remembered?
I had the privilege to spend some time with him. He was a great American. He owned his mistakes, and I think more people in government and politics should own the mistakes they made. He is a hero in my book. And he will be missed because he's one of the great truth tellers in this country, and we need more of those.
Okay, thank you everyone for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arlen Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.